Welcome to the second episode of Words of Prey, which is a Pipeline Artists original podcast. You can reach us at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com and find us at pipelineartist.com/listen. When I was asked to start Agora, which is our inaugural imprint for Polis Books, John Vercher was the first book with his 3/5 that I chose. And it was something that I immediately attached to, immediately loved, and immediately knew was going to be amazing. And there will always be kind of like Highlander, it is always the one. And so John Vercher is our second guest for this podcast. And I think that his background in both having an MFA, wanting to be published, ending up being published in genre fiction, and all of his journey going forward will hopefully be educational to everybody who's listening and has various hands in various pies. So welcome, John Vercher.
Thank you for having me. That was a hell of an introduction.
So one of the things, and we'll get to more fun things because you and I have very similar tastes when it comes to television, graphic novels, that sort of thing. And I look forward to discussing that in a more fun way in the future. But going a little bit more business at the outset, I'd like to know a little bit about your journey and, how you feel. For example, your MFA made a difference to you in being published, or what your choices were. And just a little bit about that publishing journey, because I think that you've had no credit to me being given, but a fairly decent one, a fairly, I don't want to say meteoric rise, but your book is brilliant, if I do say so myself, and it's been acknowledged as such. So how you accepted your journey, and then what you would suggest for other people in following a path. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? What was questionable or difficult, and what wasn't?
So it's kind of a braided answer in the sense that there are things that I think people will be able to take away from it, and there are things that were, at least to my knowledge, fairly unique for my situation. So if I go back to the origin of the story and when I first conceived of these characters and this idea, I've said it in a number of different interviews, but it goes back over 20 years to when I was a student at the University of Pittsburgh. So I graduated with an undergraduate degree in English, and then made, of course, a very logical transition into a physical therapy program, because who doesn't do that? But I did that because I didn't, I majored in fiction, but I didn't actually think I had any chops to write a book or do anything like that. And while I had some great professors and great teachers, it wasn't a path anybody was leading me toward. And maybe part of that had to do with the quality of my writing. I don't know. But, my parents were both in healthcare. I definitely wanted a job that wasn't just waiting tables. I made a long career and profession out of waiting tables. I think it's a really honorable profession, but I knew that I couldn't do that forever. And so I followed my parents' path into healthcare, and was lucky enough to get into a very competitive program. And I was a physical therapist for 10 years. But before that, before I had gotten into PT school, I started playing around with the idea of this story that revolved around race and identity and the conflicts around that, because I was a mixed race kid, raised as a young Black man as a college student, and when you're that age, you're already sort of trying to figure out who you are anyway, but then you add on top of this the fact that some people find you to look ambiguous racially. You always get the question of what are you? So I was dealing with some of the themes that were present in that book, and this was also around the time that not long after I graduated, when Project Greenlight was a big thing, that whole thing with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and it was kind of oh, these two guys, they never told you when they're interviewing these Damon and Affleck that they had been doing a bunch of other stuff in terms of acting and movies for years before they hit big. So it kind of was oh, these two guys wrote a screenplay and became this Oscar-winning film, and I'm I can do that. So I kind of self-taught, or I taught myself how to write a screenplay. I bought a bunch of different books on 3-act structure and just screenplay formatting, and I bought a screenplay. So I originally wrote 3/5 as a screenplay, in the late 90s. And the concept was interesting enough that a couple of production companies actually asked to look at it. So that was exciting. But the writing was dog shit and it didn't go anywhere. And so I was
I doubt that was your fault, but go ahead.
I'm very willing to admit what was on the page was not as high concept as the idea. So I made the transition. I said, okay, this is not it. And I took my licensing exam and I became a physical therapist for almost a decade. And I was good at it, but I wasn't happy. And I always felt that creative pull that was that story never went away in my mind. My wife and I are avid television movie watchers, book readers, and so anytime we were sitting there on the couch, watching a movie or watching a television show, I'm pointing out all the things that I think that could have been written better. The story could have gone this way. And the more that went on, the more I realized that man, I really miss being creative. And so I started looking for ways to incorporate it into my work, because I was well, I'm in healthcare. How can I be creative? And so I'm I'll start contributing to the company newsletter, because that's a thing. And then that sort of opened up doors for me to say, okay, well, maybe I don't need to be a clinician anymore. Maybe I can get into healthcare marketing. And I kind of found my way into that and started doing content pieces. And it was writing, and it made me happy, but it still wasn't what I wanted to do. And so my loving, supportive wife was you have to do something, because you're not doing what you're meant to do. But I felt after 10 years, I had forgotten everything I had learned about writing. And to be honest, I didn't feel I wasn't sure how much I had actually learned anyway. So I started looking at MFA programs, and I found a low residency program, and it was, but then when I applied for it, I found out that I needed 20 pages of a work in progress. And I wasn't going to send them a healthcare newsletter. That wasn't really going to cut it. So I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't, how am I going to come up with 20 pages or something? And again, brilliant wife, she says, why don't you novelize your screenplay? I was oh, I read books. I know how they work. Maybe I can do that. And so I took a stab at writing the first 20 pages of the 3/5 screenplay as a book. And I got a phone call from one of the faculty advisors there, and they said, hey, we'd love to have you if you're coming. And so I went. And it was it was a great experience. There are things that as we'll talk about later, because I'm rambling right now, but we can talk about the pluses and minuses. But so for me, this is where I think that there is and there isn't a takeaway for people that are listening, and that I didn't apply to an MFA program because I thought it was the only way to get published. I went because I wanted to publish a book, but I realized that I didn't remember anything about craft or mechanics or even what I should be, quote unquote, reading, which that's a whole nother discussion in and of itself. But I knew I needed to re-immerse myself if I was actually going to take a real run at this. So that's kind of what takes me up to the MFA.
I think, and to ramble for a moment from my end, I got John's book, listener, basically through the slush pile in my email. And I get a lot of those. But somehow I read basically the first page of this, and I knew without a doubt that it would be the launch title for the line that I was hired to do. There was something different and special and wonderful about it. However, John and I, and of course now, he's moved forward from Agora, and he's got his second book coming out in the summer of next year, which is even more brilliant than 3/5, if I'm totally honest. So I'm very excited for him. But we talked a lot about the fact that, he'd grown up, for lack of a better word, with an MFA, with these various conventions, and I was a genre publisher. So I think trying to fit 3/5 into the genre crime fiction box was a little bit of, I don't want to say a growing pain for you, but for lack of a better word, it was. Because as much as there is the literary value to that, it was also a crime fiction story that you were writing. So how did you feel about literary versus genre before you took the MFA program versus after and when I acquired you?
So I'll give you the completely honest answer. I didn't know the fucking difference. I had no idea. Like, I just read what I like to read, which is where I am now, honestly. I definitely skew towards a different type of writing. Yeah. But I don't, when I go into the bookstore, I don't make my way to a certain section. I kind of look at, if anything, I tend to look more at one of the things I love about independent bookstores is they usually have a wall where it's like the people that work there have their favorites. That's usually the first place I go. I didn't know the difference. I had no idea. I think that the emphasis on literary fiction, at least in the program that I was in, I still find that was very helpful in terms of craft and mechanics, but I also felt like the emphasis was so strong that they tended to train the story out of you. And to me, there's a difference between story and plot, right? It's nuanced, but to me, it's very clear. There's plot heavy novels and then there's story heavy novels. And to me, yes, I want deep introspective character studies, but something's got to happen. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I don't want to read about characters just standing around thinking about stuff. Yes, I want to know what they're thinking, but if they're not driven to action in some way, then what's the point? Even the growth of a character can be story, but you've got to show the growth. So I think that was maybe one of the elements that I kind of had to shed or learn to shed. And if that's in the conversation about genre versus non-genre, then maybe that kind of falls within that conversation. But I think that's where the growing pain that you talked about kind of came in. It wasn't so much about whether or not I accepted being a crime fiction writer or this or that. It's just more that, like, I learned that there is a perceived difference, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, I don't care. Really. I just want to read a story about what's that?
I said, I completely agree with you. I really feel like genre is something that happened within the last, let's say, 20 to 30 years with a particular subject matter designation that's made mostly for marketing purposes. Because, like, honestly, now having worked as an editor for a publisher for several years now, I can sell Jaws as a Western very easily. So I really think that genre is just a marketing tool, which I understand, but I also think handicaps a lot of books in a lot of ways. And a lot of books that I publish or that I edit tend to cross over into a bunch of different places. And really pigeonholing them is, I actually think, bad. I mentioned this in the last podcast that I did, but you know, if you love movies, you'll generally watch any genre of film.
Right.
One night you might want a horror movie. One night you might want a thriller or a Western or pick it, right? I don't see that as much in readers, where, you know, I only read insert genre here. I only read medical mysteries. That's not something that happens in anything other than books, really. So I think finding that thing where, and again, I don't think it's the onus of the reader that's the problem. I think it's the marketer that's the problem, and goes, hey, you know, you like this, but this crosses over here. And now, oh, if you read this and like this, now you might read this genre, or you might read that genre, because it, you know, tell me a book that just encompasses one thing.
Well, right. And I mean, isn't that sort of a microcosm of the problems we have as a culture, really? I mean, it's all about this classification and where you fit and all these different things, when, you know, especially when it comes to books, it's just like, some books are going to be some people's cup of tea and others aren't. I mean, God, go look at any Goodreads review of any book. Right. And you're going to find books that are critically acclaimed that people can't stand, and books that aren't critically acclaimed that people love. So I agree. It's a marketing ploy, and I think it's harmful, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, no, right. Okay, so another question, and I want you to be brutally honest with this one, please. Just because I happen to be your editor. In this instance, we're talking as, you know, friends, colleagues, whatever. I'd like you to tell listeners about your first publication experience and what you thought it would be, what it ended up being, what to look out for.
Are we talking from like representation on, or are we talking like...
Wherever you want to go with this. But, you know, I know that you were brutally honest with me in every step that we took together. And I really think that a lot of things that happened to you with selling your first novel are probably able to resonate with people who are on the same journey. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that I while I'm brutally honest, I'm also fair. So I think I'll go to when I graduated. You know, the whole push behind the MFA program was that by the end, your thesis would be a publishable book. Mm-hmm. And I took that literally. And so when I was done and I had gotten my mentor's final feedback and I graduated, I was like, oh shit, this thing's ready to sub. And I would caution, you know, unless you're I guess a phenom at some of the stuff, which those people certainly do exist. I would not submit your first draft straight out of an MFA program, or, you know, just your first draft in general. Like that was pure naivete on my part, and I paid the price for it. I mean, it was rejection after rejection after rejection, until I kind of figured out, okay, I need to tighten this up a bit. So the limitation, I think, in my MFA program, and I can't speak for others, so I have no idea, but there was very little discussion of the business side of things. Like if you actually want to get published, you know, I had to find out a lot of this on my own, you know, how to query. You know, we had a little bit of a background on structuring a query letter, but there was nothing about how you need to go to the website. You need to find out if this author even reps what you're writing, or excuse me, this agent even reps what you're writing, or, you know, look at their list. What have they sold? How recently have they sold? To whom are they selling? Like, these are all things that are really important that I had no fucking clue about when I graduated.
And absolutely, I think, to interrupt you for just 1 second, I think you're absolutely right, because I always say, like, you know, if you go to a doctor and a doctor recommends, you know, something's wrong and you have to have surgery, you're going to Google what they've said the minute you get home. Right. But somehow writers, there's this special rainbow golden gate, so we can't get past this. It's really, you know, unknowable. These special magical things that happen behind the publishing wall. And the thing is that you ought to inform yourself, just as you would if you were having that surgery, about, you know, how a book is published, what the questions are that you need to ask. You don't obviously have to be completely conversant in everything because you're not a publisher. But at the same time, just knowing how, what is it, the donuts are made? I think that's the saying.
The sausage is made.
Thank you. Donuts are better though, right?
Well, I mean, it depends. Yeah, I guess. Well, and let's be honest here. I mean, let's talk about the elephant in the room to some extent. Like, it's some of it's designed to be that way. Like, it's designed to be a little bit exclusive, and it's designed to be a lot exclusive for writers of color. Yeah. So, you know, and I firmly believe that I ran into a lot of that. And I say that knowing that there are some people that will roll their eyes and say that that's an excuse, that it had to do with the writing and not the walls that are put up in front of me. But, you know, those
I've read your book.
You're going to believe what you're going to believe what you're going to believe. So yeah, you're exactly right. There's this mysticism about it that is designed to be exclusionary. And it was disappointing that, again, can only speak for the program I was in. It was disappointing that there was not more done to help us navigate that path.
Well, and
so that's not to say that some people didn't offer some help. Like I definitely want to be clear that there were faculty that offered some assistance to me, but that should have been available for everybody. That should have been a class. So that was my thing.
Well, strangely, you know, I went to law school more years ago than I care to admit. And I found kind of weirdly something similar, where you were taught all of these, you know, idealized premises. But nobody graduating my law school actually knew how to file a brief at a court.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because there was not that, it was all conceptual and nothing that was like hands-on how to do it. And I felt it was very handicapping. You know, it just, I really did not have real world experience. And I think it's true of publishing or Hollywood as well. And oh my God, like quadruply so. Mm-hmm. If you're a writer of color who just, you know, can't break in at all.
Right.
So having all of this, so other than obviously giving yourself, because really at the end of the day, I don't care who you are, you have to give yourself the education. You're responsible for yourself.
Right.
So finding all of these things out and learning how it actually works, or finding somebody who will tell you how it works or whatever. But what did you do that you think was really right? And what do you wish you knew now, you know, now you're on your second book, which is brilliant, by the way.
Thank you.
I will keep saying
Thank you.
It is brilliant. But what do you wish that you had done differently or had known, or a resource that somebody else could possibly find?
So I wish I had known a lot of the things that I talked about at the beginning of that. You know, I wish I had known about how to research an agent and what to look for. I thought I had done a decent job of that because I ended up meeting my first agent at a conference that was essentially like, that taught me how to refine my pitch, which the conference did an excellent job of that. And the agent that taught that, I actually ended up going with. And I will say that some of that was because she was, you know, I always speak very highly of her. Like she's a very nice woman. She's very charming. She seemed very invested in the book. But I didn't do any of my research on her and it was research that I didn't know to do. And so I didn't know that she didn't rep my kind of book. Well, actually, that's not true. To her credit, she told me that she didn't typically rep my kind of book, but and potential or aspiring writers and writers, or aspiring authors, I should say, and writers that are listening to this now will know this feeling. When you're offered representation, you're like, fuck, I don't care if you don't represent my book or my kind of book. You're going to represent my book. So what do I give a shit about the other people you represent? And that's hugely important. Hugely important. Like, I can't stress it enough. And so because I didn't know any better, because I didn't pay attention to that fact that she had given me, we spent too long together, and it turned out to just not be a fit. Not because she had done a bad job, not because of anything other than we just weren't a fit. And so if I could say the thing that I did right was that I finally admitted to myself that having no agent was better than having the wrong agent.
I think that's very true. And actually, I was having a discussion today about how I strongly, and this is one of my myriad soapboxes that I will get on. So stop me if I start going too far.
Hey, this is your podcast.
But I really feel like agents, it's so easy to set yourself up as an agent in this business. And unlike being a lawyer, or I'm guessing even a physical therapist, or, you know, you have continuing education that you have to do. And there's absolutely nothing. And I'm not saying monetarily, educationally, whatever it is, there should be certain things when you're advising somebody about their career that you ought to know before you step in and go, I am taking responsibility for this. And there's nothing there for book agents, which is why you have to be so careful and doing research and figuring out if people know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I found surprising as I got further into my journey, quote unquote, on this whole thing. Like that fact was surprising to me. But in hindsight, the internet's an amazing thing. Like you can find out a lot. Book Twitter, quote unquote, is a very real thing. You can connect with people who will give you the straight dope on what you need to know. But having said that, and when it comes to any of the research that you do for agents, publishers, editors, what have you, you don't just go with the first amount of information that you get either. Like you don't go with the first opinion you get. It's to use your analogy, it's the same as a physician. Like, even if your doctor recommends another doctor to you, like if you got a heart problem and he recommends you to an orthopedist, well, you probably shouldn't go see that guy. And then even if he does send you to the right kind of doctor, you might want to talk to a few people that doctor has seen. So it's at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision, right? You've got to go with your gut, but you've also got to make that gut decision informed to some extent. And that's the thing I didn't do.
Brilliant things that you said, answering my rambling question, it is, the fact that if you are a new author and you've got a book and somebody offers to represent you, you just get so excited. You don't care what experience they have. You don't care what background they have. You don't care. And I think it's so important to know that, it's like selling anything. Like if you know how to sell a car, that doesn't mean you know how to sell a refrigerator. Right. And so, if you specialize in romance, and I worked for many years, I was the editor-in-chief of RT Book Reviews magazine. So that specialized in romance, but it had a lot of other arms as well. But if you did one thing, that didn't necessarily mean that you knew how to do, if I'm an agent, I just because pick a person, John Grisham, anybody, pick somebody. I'm John Grisham's agent and I can sell him, everywhere. And that's amazing. And I want to represent you, but you write nonfiction or memoir. That's a whole different marketing tool. That's a whole different, it's a whole different networking scheme, because all of the reason behind an agent is to get in front of people who want what you're offering. And if you go, well, I sell refrigerators and you sell houses, whatever it is.
Right.
These are two very different types of sales. And one does not necessarily transfer into the other, no matter how large the one person is in that small pond.
That's exactly right.
So I think that was really, really smart of you. Okay, so going into the more fun part, hopefully, of this interview, one of the questions that I really like to ask is, obviously, you've done 3/5 with Agora, and your next book is coming out next summer, which is also very psychological and literary and has all of these things. But what I'm really dying to know is if you could write for any property or person, who would it be and what would it be?
God, that's such a long list.
I know.
I can tell you the one that comes to mind immediately just because it was recent. But there were 4 hours of my life I couldn't get back with the Zack Snyder version of Justice League.
Oh, good. Don't start that. We'll have a 4-hour podcast, please.
Look. It was better. It was better than the 2.5 that I lost on the Whedon version. Admittedly better, but it was still 4 hours of garbage. But the highlight was the expansion of Ray Fisher's Cyborg.
Oh
And
God, yes.
and so I have my two boys, they're 8 and 6, and they love a lot of the Lego properties, right? Like the Lego Marvel, Lego DC stuff.
Mhm.
And one of the things that has driven me up a wall, and I will actually not let them watch the Lego Justice Leagues one anymore, and it is because the cyborg character in those ones is always putting on this voice that is so stereotypically black, where it's offensive, and like I don't want them having that impression of one of the main black characters in the DC universe who's got a great story, and he's sort of being reduced to this it's caricature. And so when I saw the I mean, Ray Fisher really plays that character, even with the shitty script he's been given. He plays
No, he does
plays
it really well.
yeah, he plays it with real, like, this very understated kind of just this, and he's got this.
Honestly, between that and the Flash, like it's just
the Flash.
get rid of everybody else.
Yeah, the Flash even is a little. He's all right. Anyway.
Okay. So we're gonna have a fight over this, but keep going.
So all that to say, I would love to write a cyborg property, even though I don't know the character as well, because I'm much more of a Marvel guy than DC. Like it's not even close, really. But I really liked what they did with him in that movie, and I would love to see, like, that character deserves a solo, because there's so much about what you can dive into the manipulation of black bodies and his struggle with his parents, there's such a rich character to be mined there. So that's my most recent answer.
I think that's wonderful, and we'll go into Flash in a minute, but to answer the second part. Yeah, we're going back. Is there a particular actor or actress that you would like to write for, or somebody that you already do in your head when you write something? Like, do you cast?
Yes, yeah. So for my second book, there's one character who I had an actor in mind specifically for no other reason than I was capturing his manner of speaking, some of his facial expressions, because I think he's one of the most talented actors out there. Brian Tyree Henry. So he was he's the voice of Miles Morales' father in Into the Spider-Verse, if we're talking comic book stuff, but he's brilliant as Paperboy.
We're always talking comic book stuff.
Yeah. But where he is a standout is as Paperboy in Atlanta, which to me is still the greatest television show ever created.
No, that's a great answer. So is there any property that's not like a comic book property, just a character that you'd like to play in their universe?
I'm not a series guy when it comes to books, which is odd because I love comic books, but I don't typically like books that are series. So TV series, I mean, Atlanta would be amazing.
Yeah.
Like that, because like the second season of that show in particular was so incredible in the sense that, like, there are characters that follow through the series, but each episode could have stood alone. There was one episode in particular in season 2 that you could have expanded into a full length movie. It was that good. And it was one where they centered Lakeith Stanfield, who was in Get Out, and he just got nominated for Judas and the Black Messiah. So yeah, Atlanta for sure. I honestly don't think I could keep up with Donald Glover. Like, I don't think my writing could meet the brilliance of that show. Can you tell I like the show?
I can tell a little bit. So going back, I'm curious about your reaction to The Flash.
He's too sticky. Like I couldn't, and in the Snyder cut, there was like some weirdness there, man. Like when he was saving the woman from the car crash, and he's like kind of caressing her face, and it's like, you just saw this woman, and then he reaches for the hot dog, which, like, we get later why he's going to do that, but immediately after he's caressing the woman's face, like, the whole vibe in that part of the scene like it kind of like flavored his character for the rest of the movie for me. So I was kind of like, nah, I'm not really here with Flash. I'm not feeling it.
Okay, you're not wrong, but where I was going with this, and I'm not saying that I'm right, especially based on what you just said, but I feel like a lot of the more, for lack of a better word, A-list characters, I feel like the writers and directors were constrained by what was expected and couldn't do anything extra. And so that's why I preferred Cyborg and Flash out of that movie, because they were, no offense to the characters, but they're not, the popular kid, right?
Right, right.
That's the secondary character. And I felt like a lot more was done with those because there wasn't that constraint.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It had more depth.
I got into a big conversation with a very long text conversation with another writer, Matt Coleman, about the mistakes that DC has made versus Marvel. Why the MCU is getting it right and DC just keeps shit in the bed. And the big thing is they rely on like their big three. They always rely on their big three. Like it's got to be Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and they've only gotten Batman right. There's yet to be a Superman movie that touches Superman 2 with Christopher Reeves. Like they just can't come anywhere close. That's fact. I'm not even going to argue opinion on that. Like this is fact. There's no better Superman. I
agree with that statement, but okay.
You disagree with that?
And basically my issue is with Lois Lane more than Superman, but
well, yeah, there's Margot Kidder. Like that's just, she is Lois Lane. Like there's just no two ways about it. And you can't get out of the comedy of Richard Pryor in Superman 3. Like that's just Richard Pryor scenes alone are, that's cinema gold. But like Marvel, but the whole point was that Marvel has done a fantastic job of making ancillary characters interesting, right? Like if you had told me there was going to be an Ant-Man movie before the MCU had kind of gotten some steam, I'd been like, you're out of your fucking mind. Like, there's no way I'm going to see an Ant-Man movie. It was a ridiculous character in the comic books. And yet they found the right director and the right writers to say, we're not going to take this too seriously, but we're still going to make him instrumental to the grander story that we're going to tell, which is Endgame. Because without Ant-Man, there is no quantum tunnel. There's none of the time travel stuff. Like, none of that works if you don't incorporate Ant-Man into it. DC has not done that. Like they cannot make their ancillary characters interesting. They always rely on the big ones. And then they try to make them dark and edgy. And like Superman's not dark and edgy. Like you can't do that. I have a whole thing. So like you said, this could be a whole nother podcast.
Well, no, I even down to, watch the Snyder Cut like a week ago. And it made just to make a visual statement about how I feel the characters are in their ethos. Like we had Batman with his weird vest. He looked like a croupier. And then there's Aquaman, who I think is cast perfectly for this. But
he's so
keep
good.
Just introducing his character. And then we have in this same scene with the croupier vest scene, we've got the scarf with a sleeveless tank top. Like none of this makes sense. Like there's so much going on there and nothing is happening.
Yeah, well, that's actually a really accurate statement about it. I think like every DC movie. There's a shit ton to look at, but nothing's actually happening.
Yeah.
Like they fall apart. They fall apart. Well, and the other thing too is that DC has this thing about like making their heroes godlike. And and I don't mean like in the religious sense. I mean like
Well, you should
like Greek,
if you're talking about Superman, but we'll talk about that later.
like mythological god, like they are deities unto themselves. Where Marvel heroes and even the villains they're like people. Like you can, I mean, Thanos is talking about like saving resources, and you're kind of like, oh, all right, well, okay, maybe. And then, the thing that got me about the Thanos Darkseid comparisons were like, Darkseid, they got to give him glowing red eyes, and they got to give him this big, huge voice alteration, and he's got to sound so evil. And with Thanos, you just got Josh Brolin talking, and he's 10 times more menacing than this overblown like CGI character in DC. Like they've got something, they've got a formula over there for the writing and the actors and the acting that DC just has not figured out yet. They've been playing catch up ever since, and they're not even close. They're not even in the run.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I also, in a slightly larger sense, disagree with a little bit of how both universes have been doing the villains. Like, I grew up, and just like you mentioned moments ago, was, Christopher Reeve Superman. Mm-hmm. And we had Lex Luthor, and he was Gene Hackman. And not that was the best villain ever, but it was relatable and not human is the wrong word. But there was a level of depth to it. And then I feel like in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, we've rebooted all of the villains that are, I don't know. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just not human, but very vague and without depth or without a true cause. And
one notable exception. One notable exception.
Okay, go with a notable exception.
Killmonger in Black Panther.
Okay, yes, that is very true. James Spader is an amazing villain. He was perfectly cast for that. But
he's great.
There was no reason behind this villainy.
It was there, but it was not fleshed out well. It could have been done much better. And actually, his manner of speaking as Ultron was jarring. Like I didn't expect. Like I expected somewhat human conversation from the robot, but not like that human.
Right.
Like, I mean, if you know who James Spader was, you were like, oh, that's James Spader playing James Spader. Like it wasn't right. It wasn't a huge reach, but he's he plays good villains. So I think it was a combination of those things where it was like his agenda wasn't super clear, other than was this AI awakened and thought the Avengers were bad.
I feel like that's
a little more than that.
I feel like that's the villain that they keep coming up with in different iterations.
I don't think that's unique to Marvel. I think that's a problem in literature and books in general. To bring it back full circle, if we talk about 3/5, like when I first started writing Aaron, he was very one note and very just I tried to make him as evil as I could, because that's what racists are, right? Like, but the truth of that matter is somewhat uglier than we want to admit, which is that sometimes people like that they can have moments in their life and people in their life to whom they are kind.
Yeah.
And we can't reconcile that shit. And so those are the shows that attract me the most. I think it's why Breaking Bad was such a huge success. Like, by all accounts, Walt White is despicable, but then he does these things where you're like, okay, well, he did really start this for his family, we think, and then he has these moments of kindness throughout the show, even in the midst of like all this horrible shit that he does. But like, human nature is not pretty; it's ugly,
right?
Especially when you give in to the uglier sides of it, and so. That's why to me Killmonger was amazing, because like Killmonger to me, I always say he's a quote unquote villain. Like some of the shit he was saying wasn't wrong. It was the way he was going to go about rectifying the wrongs that were wrong. So it's that you're right that there's a lack of that kind of villainy in the MCU, definitely in DC. But I think that's true of a lot of creative forms. It's almost like we're too afraid to admit that evil people can still have some elements that make us feel like they're human at times.
Well, and I think that's it. I mean, it's why, anti-heroes work. I always say to my students, I'm like, there's no reason that I should ever relate, for example, to Batman. I don't have list the things here. But there is the thing that I relate to, which is a desire for justice to be served. And so even though this is a character that I can't relate to at all, there's an element there that I can. It's a part of me that I would like to see happen. And I think the same is true of all villains.
I almost think it's more true for villains.
Yeah. There has to be that element where it's like, I've always wanted to do this, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're going, okay, I relate. I've always wanted to act out against X, or, right. I've been so put down by the way this, scenario is that I need to react against it. Mm-hmm. So I think totally. that's why I'm so confused when so many of these villains are unrelatable or just one note.
When I'm reading a book or watching a movie where a villain has absolutely no redeeming qualities or no redemption arc or potential for a redemption arc, I usually check out.
Yeah.
I'm not interested. All right. Just as an aside, you can totally edit this out, but as a matter of fact, you probably should, because it's totally unrelated to everything we're talking about other than Batman. But I firmly believe this Matt Reeves Batman movie will be the absolute best one. And it's for one reason and one reason only. And I had this conversation with Coleman and it was pretty funny. But have you seen the trailer for the new one?
Yes.
Okay. This is the only trailer and the only Batman movie where he does not say, "I'm Batman." He says, "I'm vengeance."
Yeah.
When they ask him who he is. That has driven me crazy about every Batman movie since the Keaton one. Like, Batman would never call himself Batman. He's a symbol, and that's it. Like, and the fact that even the title of the movie is The Batman, not Batman, right? People would refer to him as The Batman. We're not cutting this out,
by the way.
It's so important, though. It really is. Like, is. Okay, no, in terms of writing, in terms of writing, it is important. Like, Batman is not going to, like, even in the first Christian Bale iteration, the Batman Begins, when he punches through the window and pulls the guy up, and he asks, "What are you?" He's not going to, "I'm Batman." Come on. Like, that's, if you're really going to dive into what you were talking about, all of the things that motivate him, it's not branding. Like, he's not going to give himself a title. The same thing with Superman. Superman is not going to call himself, but Superman never calls himself Superman. Everybody else calls him Superman. The fact that Batman is a
whole different thing.
But that was the title the public gave him, right?
Yeah.
They saw the S on his chest. They saw him do super things. He's a Superman, right? Here's a guy dressed up like a bat. He's the Batman. He's the Batman that's prowling our streets. Like, that's the other thing I think they get wrong in all of these Batman movies, and even in the Batman comics, is everybody should be afraid of Batman, not just criminals. It's a dude in a bat suit beating the shit out of people. Why would I walking the streets feel safer that there's a guy in a bat suit kicking the shit out of people? Thankfully, he's beating up criminals. I'm telling you, you talk about properties I want to write for. Man, I would love to dive into that stuff with Batman.
Okay,
Batman
so 2 for 2, we're on Batman. And my first guest also chose Batman.
Yes. There's so much that can be done there.
So, okay. That went a lot of different places I was not expecting, but I'm very happy about it. Why don't, John, please tell your website, the date of your upcoming book, et cetera, please.
I will share the website and social media because you asked, but I will tell all your listeners that don't go there for any juicy content or hot takes in terms of social media posts. I'm very boring. I'm usually just promoting my next thing. So I'm on, my website is the highly original johnvercherauthor.com. You can find me on Twitter at jverch75, JVERCH75, and on Instagram at johnvercher75. But again, no hot takes, nothing, none of this stimulating conversation you just heard, just mostly books, promotion stuff. My next book, After the Lights Go Out, is coming from Soho Press, July of 2022, which I wish it was sooner. I can't wait, but I'm very excited.
No, it's amazing. Please pre-order this. Like it's crazy good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't deal with compliments well, but I thank you. That's it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. And
thank you for having me.
And I hope we do this again very, very soon.
This has been Words of Prey, and it is a Pipeline Artists original. And Pipeline Artists focuses on education, empowerment, and elevating authentic voices in film, publishing, and beyond. And you can contact us and the other future podcasts at podcasts, plural, at pipelineartist.com. And you can find us and a bunch of other amazing podcasts at pipelineartist.com/listen. And if you have any suggestions for guests or anything else, or any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will see you next time.